Hi, Paul here, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this space scene. We're not actually going to use any photographs. Every part of this image has been created within Photoshop just using filter effects and layers and no images whatsoever. So let's get to it. Okay, first thing we need to do is open up a new document because we're not using any images. We need to create a new one. So let's go to File, New. We'll use inches for this, so we want it to be 9 inches across by 16 inches high. And for this we'll use a resolution of 130 pixels per inch. 130 doesn't really mean anything with regards to print or imaging for display of images on the screen. It's just a number I've used because I can resize the image down. I mean, I don't want to size it up, I'll resize it down. If I want to do it for print, I will use 300. If I want to create an image strictly for display on screen, I will create it at 72 pixels per inch. But when creating images for the internet, it's better to create them at a larger resolution than resize them down later on. Okay, so once we've got that 9 by 16 inches and 130 pixels per inch resolution, let's give it a name. We'll call it space, and let's click OK. And let me just close down these images here. Keep that one open for later. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we need to create a star field. And the best way to do that, and I'll just hit F on my keyboard to maximize my screen, and I'll just go Command or Control plus to zoom in. The best way to do that is to actually use some filter effects rather than paint them in. So I'm going to change my colors to back to their default, which is black and white, which I'll do now by clicking on that small icon. And the first filter effect I'm going to use is Filter, Sketch and Reticulation. And you can see I get this sort of noise field on here. So if I increase the density, you can see I'll get more white than there is black in the image, and that's fine. So I'll just leave it at around 16. I won't touch the foreground or background level, and I'll just click OK. Okay, so far it doesn't look too much like stars, so we need to run another filter effect. So let's go back to Filter from the pull down menu, back to Sketch, and this time we'll use Plaster. And you can see by altering the image balance, I can get what appear to be drops on the screen. Or if I push it all the way up to 50, that reticulation effect will be turned into something that looks like stars. So make sure your image balance is at 50, and let's click OK, so we get this effect. Now at the moment it doesn't really look like stars, so what we need to do is we need to alter the way the amount of black compared to white is displayed on the screen. So let's go to Levels, Image Adjustments and Levels. And we can alter the amount of black that's in the image and the amount of white that's in the image. So I might crunch those values, something like that. And I'll click OK. Okay, once we've done that, we want the stars to glow a little bit, so let's open up our layers palette with F7 or F7 on the keyboard, and we'll duplicate the layer. So we can do that two ways, or three ways actually. We can click and drag the layer onto the new layer icon, or if I undo that with Control Z. If I want to duplicate the layer, what I can do is push Ctrl J, that will duplicate it, or alternatively I can go layer, duplicate layer. But Ctrl J is a great shortcut to use. Okay, so what we want to do with this layer here is we want to blur it out slightly, so let's just change first of all the way the layer is displayed. So we'll change it from normal to screen, and your stars will brighten up somewhat. And we'll use a filter effect, and I'll just zoom in a little bit so I can see what's going on. So make sure that's set to screen or linear dodge. And if I say filter, blur, Gaussian blur, I might blur that out to about 4 pixels. And then I'll colorize it. Control U, or image adjustment, hue and saturation. I'll click on colorize and push the saturation right up, and I might choose a value of around 202, 201, and I'll click OK. Okay, then now that glow hasn't, you can just see it, and it hasn't really done much to it, so let's blur it a little bit more. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur. I might blur it out a little bit more. Doesn't seem to be working. I'll just click OK anyway. Let's see what happens if I duplicate that layer. Ah yes, I can see a little bit more glow around it. Okay, so let's compress those 3 layers down into one. So if I hold the Shift key and on the top layer and I click on the bottom layer there, so they're all selected, the shortcut for squashing those layers together is Command E. And at this point, let's rename it. Double click on the word background and we'll call it Starfield. And click OK. Now I'll zoom out. Okay, next thing we need to do is we need to add some clouds to our scene. So let's create a new blank layer by clicking on this new layer icon down here. And we'll double click on the word layer 1 and we'll label it gas cloud and hit enter. Okay, the first thing we want to do right now is we need to create a selection, and a selection is really just a closed off area that anything I do to the image now will only take place inside that closed off area. So I'm going to choose this selection tool, rectangular or elliptical, doesn't really matter, and I'm just going to click and drag out an area. And then if I hold Shift, a little positive sign will appear next to my cursor, and this will allow me to click and drag and add to the selected area. And I can swap the elliptical marquee tool if I want and use elliptical selections. I can switch back. I can keep on adding to it. Okay, and that'll do at this point. Now, if I'm to do anything now to this image, it's not going to look like clouds. I mean, if I fill this with a colour, and I'll just demonstrate this by using white, edit, fill, and I'll use the foreground colour. I'll click OK. Doesn't much look like clouds, does it? So I'll just undo that with Command Z. What we need to do is soften this selection somehow. And the way to do that is, because it's called a selection, we can go to the Select pull-down menu. We can use Modify. We can choose Feather. And I want to feather it for a value of 80 pixels. And I'll click OK. And that'll make our shape more amorphous and organic looking. Okay, so once we've got the selection active, to create our clouds, what we actually need is one colour black, and we'll choose a green hue for this, and I think somewhere around here might do. Maybe a bit brighter. And once you're happy with the colour you've got, click OK. Okay, nothing's happened yet. All we've done is change the colours, so we need to apply an effect to this selected area, making sure that we're on this new gas cloud layer. So let's go to Filter from the pull down menu, Render Clouds, and you can see we have a new effect that's been applied there, and you can see the edges are quite soft. That's the way we want them. And at this point now, what we also want to do is add a bit more structure to this cloud looking mass here. So let's go back to the Filter pull down menu, choose Render and Difference Clouds, and you can see some more sort of structure is being introduced. Let's do it again. Photoshop remembers the last filter effect we used, so I'm just going to hit Command or Control F. I might do it one more time and one more time after that, and you can see now that we're introducing some fine texture to it. Okay, once you're happy with what you've got, deselect by hitting Control D or Command D, depending on if you're using a Mac or a PC, to turn it off. And let's zoom out a little bit. So I'm going to use Control or Command minus to zoom out. And what I'm going to do with that right now, well, actually I won't, I'll just zoom back up. I'll zoom out a little bit. I'll hit, I want to change the size of those clouds. So let's go to Edit Transform, or Free Transform, sorry. And I can drag that out, make that a lot larger, just by dragging out those corners. If I want to keep it perfectly constrained, I can hold the Shift key down while I'm doing it. And once you're happy with it, hit Enter to initiate the change. Okay, so good. So far, so good. At the moment, it's looking very boring because it's looking very monochromatic because we've only got one colour in it. So let's duplicate this gas cloud layer with Command or Control J, and then we'll use Control or Command T to activate the free transform. And what I'm going to do is hold my cursor outside the box that surrounds the image, and I'm going to rotate it. I might stretch it out a little bit more, and I'll hit Enter to initiate that change. Okay, now the reason we duplicated the layer and we rotated it around is because we're going to actually change its colour. So a good way to change its actual colour overall for that single layer itself is to use a shortcut Command U, which will bring up the hue saturation controls. And what I can do is I can adjust the hue, and in this case I want to bring it to a nice sort of, I might bring it to a cyan-y colour. And I'll click OK. Okay, so we've got two colours in there, one's a green and one's a cyan colour. This layer here, currently it's set to normal. We want to be able to see through it, so if I change its layer mode to screen, the image will brighten up somewhat and I'll be able to see the stars behind it. Okay, let's duplicate the layer again. Command or Control J, Control T to do a transform on it, and I'll hold my cursor outside the box and I will rotate again. And once I'm happy, I'll hit Enter, and I'll run the same effect again. Control U to bring up the hue saturation controls, and in this case I will make the clouds a bit more orange. I can also adjust the saturation for that single layer if I wish. And I will hit OK. Okay, now that we've got the clouds in there, we want to make them a bit more sort of see-through and a bit more gassy. We want to lose some of that structure in there. You can see that we have duplications of structure in here. So let's sandwich these three layers together only. Remember, if I hold the Shift key down and click on the last layer that I want to merge together, those three are selected. I hit Command E and they'll squash together. They become one layer. Okay, what I'll also do now is I'll also zoom out a little bit, because what I want to do here is I want to do a transform again. Control T, drag up, and I'll drag that into a position there. That'll do. I'll hit enter and zoom back up with Command plus. Okay, so you can see now it's looking a little bit more gassy with not so much high detail in it. Okay, let's, if you want, actually, what you can do is, because the image is being transformed and it's actually bigger than the limits of the image, I can drag this around and find a more interesting sort of area that I can use. Something like that doesn't look too bad. And what I'll do with it now once more is duplicate this layer. So if I go to Control J and I change its layer mode to screen, you can see now that it brightens up considerably. I want to see some more stars in the background here, so this bottom layer here, I won't change its layer mode. So this bottom gas cloud layer, what I'll do is I'll adjust its opacity so I can see through it. That'll do it. And this top layer here also, I'll make a further adjustment on it. So if I use levels, image adjustments levels, or Control L or Command L, what I can do is I can up the density a bit more, and I can brighten that up as well. That'll do it, and I'll click OK. If you want, you can also increase the color saturation of it by using image adjustments hue saturation or Control U. Up to yourself. You don't want to crunch it too hard or else you'll start to get flat spots. But something like that will do. And you can also adjust the overall hue if you wanted as well. But I'm not going to do that. I might pull that saturation down a little bit. That'll do. Okay, so now we have a nice background for our image. Okay, the next thing we need to do is create a planet for our space scene. So let's create a new document. File, New. We'll use inches once again. Width of 5 and a height of 5. And once you're happy with that, click OK. And let's choose a couple of colours. So I might choose a very light green, and for the background colour I might use a darker green, and I'll click OK. So we have a light green and a dark green. So let's choose our paintbrush, and the brush we want to use is this three-bladed piece of grass here. If I want to make my brush smaller, what I can do is I can use the brackets to the right of my letter P on the keyboard, and I can shrink it down, and that will do. And we also need to control the way the brush operates, so you'll see a little panel here. If I open that one up here and I make sure that shape dynamics is turned on, so size jitter is set to 100%, and you can see how it's going to affect the brush down here. So if I change that, okay, you can see I'm getting different sizes. Angle jitter, scattering, color dynamics. What color dynamics does is it looks at the two colors and it uses those colors but colors in between. And once you're happy with that, close it and we can just start painting. Now I'm not trying to be too neat about this, I'm just basically scribbling over the background. That'll do. Okay, once you've scribbled that in, let's choose another two colours. So in this case I'm going to use a foreground colour of blue, and I'll use a dark blue as well. And once again I'll start painting over it. Okay, that'll do. One more colour change, so in this case I'll use a cyan colour. Very bright cyan, maybe a bit too bright. And for the background colour I'm going to choose, actually believe it or not, red, or a reddy colour. And I'll just paint some detail in like that. I might change that to a more of an orange colour as well, and a bit more, just to add some variation of colour in there. And once you're happy with what you've got, let's blur it. Filter, blur, motion blur, set your blur to maximum distance here and angle to 0. And you may find that you'll get a foggy spot in the middle of the image. That's okay, just click OK, and we'll run it again. Filter, motion blur, and one more time, filter, motion blur. Okay, so you can see we've got some good variations of colours in there. I really wanted to use cyan and green colours because our background is a greeny sort of colour. Okay, once we've got that, we need to warp it a little bit. So if we go to Filter, Distort and Wave, you can see I've set my generators to 5. I've got a long wavelength on it. Amplitude is set from between 5 and 6. Look at there's some ripples in it. And once you're happy, click OK. And you can see that we have now this ripple effect into it. Okay, next we need to do is need to run some of these colours into one another. So let's go to the Liquify tool, Filter, Liquify. And I'm using this brush here, Forward Warp tool. I'm going to shrink my brush down a little bit and zoom up a little bit. So I'll zoom up with Command plus and I'll shrink my brush with my bracket keys. And what I'm going to do is simply distort these lines a bit further. Now the more time you spend doing this, the better your planet will look. So each sort of area of banding, I'm just distorting. I just held my spacebar down then so I could drag the image down so I could see what I was doing. Spacebar down again, move the image up. Create a big spot in the planet, I can just simply use a larger brush and I can run all these sort of colours together. Okay, and I can also use a smaller brush for finer detail if you want to go that far. Okay, at this point I'll just leave it like that. That'll do for this tutorial. As I said, the more time you spend on it, larger brushes and smaller brushes, the better effect you'll get. Okay, once you're happy, click OK. And it'll introduce those changes. Okay, next thing we need to do is distort it a little bit more, and we'll cut it out. So let's choose our elliptical marquee tool. I'm going to hold the Shift key down now. And I'm going to hold my cursor just inside the corner there. I'm going to click and drag a circle out to the edges. Well, not quite to the edges, but nearly. Okay, next thing to do is to distort it. So let's go to Filter, Distort, and Spherize it. Make sure your amount is set to 100%. And click OK. That'll make it look spherical. Okay, let's shrink our selection a little bit. Select, modify, contract. I'll do it by 3 pixels and click OK. And then what we want to do is feather it and soften the edge a little bit. Select, modify, feather, which I'll do by 2 pixels. Click OK. And now I'm ready to cut it out. Edit, copy. Okay, so if I go back to our image that we're working on, I can now paste it in. So make sure you're on the top layer. I'll now go edit, paste. Of course, it's pasted in. And what I want to do also is I want to shrink it down. So I'll make sure I'm on my move tool. I'll hit Control T on the keyboard, making sure I hold the Shift key down. I'll drag from a corner, and then I can drag this to where I want it. I might rotate it a little bit as well. And that'll do it, and I'll hit enter, and we'll zoom up a little bit using my spacebar to track the image up. Okay, so currently, yeah, it looks fine, but it doesn't really match the background here. So what we want to do here, first of all, we're actually going to add some shadow to the planet. So let's duplicate this planet, which we'll call it a name. We'll double click in the layer itself and we'll rename it to planet. And then hit Control J to duplicate it. Okay, so we've got a planet and a planet copy. So let's go to planet copy and rename that to shadow. And what we want to do with this layer, what we want to do is we want to fill the planet with black. So holding the Control key down, click in the little thumbnail picture inside the layers palette. Okay, the layer labelled shadow, and it'll put a selection around it. Now what we do now is we fill it with black. Edit, fill, and we'll choose black, and OK. And then deselect it with Command or Control D. Okay, our planet's, it was looking okay, but now it's covered up. That's okay. What we want to do right now is we'll use our Move tool, and we'll move, and the arrows on the keyboard will just move that shadow down. That'll do, something like that. I'll also blur it out a little bit. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and blur it out a bit more. That's not looking too bad. Maybe a little bit more. Yeah, that'll do. And I'll click OK. Okay, now it doesn't look too much good. It doesn't look too good at the moment. So what we're going to do with it, we're going to make it a little bit bigger. Control T for the transform, and I'm going to hold Shift and drag those corners. And once I'm happy with the size of it, I might actually make it a little bit bigger. That'll do. I'll hit enter. And you can see now it's now outside the boundary of the planet. So, but that's no problem. What we'll do is we'll go to the leave it on shadow. We'll just hold our Control key down, and on the planet layer itself, inside the little picture on that layer, if I click on that little picture, it'll put a selection around it. We're still on the shadow layer, by the way. We just made a selection based on what was on the planet layer. And what we want to do is we want to get rid of this black on the outside. So let's reverse the selection. Select, inverse, and then you can hit delete, making sure that you're on the shadow layer. And then Control D, and you'll see now that we have a nice shadow on our planet. Okay, next thing we want to do is let's soften the way that shadow looks, so it's not so black. Let's change the opacity of it a little bit. That'll do. And we'll now squash these two layers together. So if I just hit Control E, it will squash with the layer underneath it. So the shadow and the layer and the planet are now one layer. Okay, let's duplicate that again. Control J. And what we want to do, we want to put a bit of atmosphere around the planet. So this one's on top, this one's down below. So let's click on that one layer there and say filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and we'll choose, let's have a look, what do we got here? 13 pixels might do it. Click OK, and then we'll duplicate the layer again, make the atmosphere stand out a bit more. If you don't want to do that, you don't have to. You can just you don't have to duplicate it. Let's zoom out. Okay, not looking too bad so far. Okay, the planet and planet copy, let's sandwich those together. Control E. And we'll duplicate it once more. Control J. And what we'll do is we'll move that duplicate off to the side here. Use Control T. And we'll shrink it down. And we'll make it very, very small. And hit Enter. And move it into a position. Okay, once we've got a couple of planets in there, what we can also do is we can, if we want, alter the colour of this, but I'll leave it the way that it is for the time being. Okay, next operation to do is need to put a big star in here. So let's go to the gas cloud copy layer here. Create a new blank layer by clicking on the new layer icon. And let's fill it with black. Edit, fill, making sure the contents are set to black, and OK. Okay, we can't really see much so far, but that's not to worry. What we need to do is change the way this layer looks, or the way it's displayed, so let's change it from normal to linear dodge. And that'll cause black to drop out of the image, or not be displayed. And we'll run a filter effect. Filter, render, lens flare. And in this case I'm going to use 105mm prime, and I'll set it to around 80%, and I'll click OK. And that'll give us a nice star in there. But the beautiful thing about this is because it's on a black layer and we've set it to linear dodge, what I can do now is I can use my eraser tool, make it smaller, and I can just rub those artifacts from the lens flare out. Okay, let's create another blank layer. Fill it with black. And we'll create another lens effect, lens flare effect. Filter, render, lens flare. I'm going to choose 35mm prime. Make it very small. Place it down here. OK. Set the layer to display from normal to linear dodge. Okay, and what we can do is we can move that star anywhere we like. Remember, we can rub out any artifacts that appear from it. And if we want, we can also change its colour. So, Command U. We can boost the saturation. And we can change its colour to whatever we want. Okay, our foreground planet here needs a bit more sort of punch in it, so let's go to our planet. Hold the control key down and click in the little thumbnail in the layer so it's selected. And then let's choose filter, render, lighting effects. You can see that I can move the light around. This is the beam width. This is where the light's coming to. I can increase the intensity, which I don't want to do in this case. I also increase the ambience, which I don't want to touch. once I'm happy, if I click OK, so I get more light on it. Control D, it just gives it a bit more sort of punch. And there's our image finished. Now if you want, you can also duplicate the gas cloud layer, and if you want, you place it above the planet. That'll put a little bit of mist over it. You can also decrease the opacity of that so it's not so intense over it. Okay, also the star layer, you can duplicate that on top. That'll make it a bit more sort of brighter, up to yourself. And yeah, I hope you learned something. There you go. See you later. Bye.